All right. Let's say hi.
Hi.
Hello.
What's
Are
going
we
on?
live?
All right. Let's say hi.
Hi.
Hello.
Yep.
Are we
We're
live?
we're we're good. We're good. All right. So yeah, welcome to Living in the Scriptures live. We got Caleb, Peter, and David. And what are we talking about today, Peter?
Well, we just want to welcome David to our broadcast today. It's great to have you, David. Brian is still visiting family out east, so we'll miss him. Today we're looking at back on the church in Laodicea. That was what we looked at on the weekend. It's the last of the seven churches, and I'm just going to jump right into it. If you have any questions or thoughts about that, you can kind of hit our broadcast and look at the sermon itself. But I wanted to kind of jump right in with this idea of lukewarm. Jesus says to the church, I know your deeds. You're neither cold nor hot. I wish you were one or the other, but because you are lukewarm. And so I wanted to ask you guys, like, where do you see yourselves, or where do you see maybe even the church, where do you see yourselves being hot or being cold or being lukewarm? And I want to use the definition that Jesus uses with hot and cold, like hot being like medicinally, like you're hot and you're like passionate, cold being refreshing, it's good. Most of the time in scripture, whenever faith is described as cold, it's bad. But here it says, no, it's actually refreshing, right? So where is your faith hot, or where is it refreshing, and where might it be lukewarm?
Great question. I think that faith is refreshing for me in because of the community of believers that I'm in. When you believe something, and when you believe Christ and you follow Christ, you're called to do that in a community context. So I'm following Jesus. Peter, you're following Jesus. My family, we're trying to follow Jesus, and so we're trying to encourage each other to follow Jesus. And the the I guess I don't know if you remember the kids video from last week at church. If you guys were at church watching, if you weren't there, you won't know. But there was the kids video just was fantastic because it brought up there was one of the characters who was like, I'm not growing, I'm not changing, I haven't seen God, in a blinding ray of light. And they kind of said, well, listen, that's not the lesson was it's not how it works. It's actually you grow from all the tiny little things, and a lot of that comes from the people around you, that they're wisdom that they're giving you, advice that they're giving you, or just even the conflicts you have with one another causes you to grow and follow Christ in that context. So for me, what's been really refreshing to me is just the other believers that are around me, seeing what God's doing in their life, praying with them. I get spirit and truth. That's just an incredibly encouraging thing. Seeing friends that I've known for a long time, praise and lead in music or be involved, or seeing young people step up into these roles. There's lots of things there that's really refreshing to me. So the community aspect is a real win for me. It's really a lot of refreshing there, and especially with my own kids. Seeing my own kids grow is refreshing too. And where I would say I'm lukewarm would probably be in the area of like personal, private, passionate prayer. I'm feeling like that's an area where maybe there's just too many things going on, and so just stop. I'm not gonna be distracted. I'm gonna spend time actually praying about these things that I'm thinking about. Some days I feel like at the end of the day I'm too tired, just want to go to sleep. So I would say that's probably one area where I'm lukewarm. Yeah.
David, you look like you're deep in thought.
No, I was just thinking about the different aspects of like passion and how when we're really hot and on fire for God, it can only last for a season because we can get so what would the word be? We get so passionate that we sort of put all our energy into that, and because of that, we can get tired and we can become complacent because of all the energy that comes into being passionate. And that's why I think being cool and refreshing is so important as well. Is that balance that we strike. And so that's all I was thinking about, is that passionate people that try to maintain that passion for so long forget about the cooling grace of God. That's all I was thinking about.
Yeah, that's a good thought.
That's a totally good thought. And when I think about this, I kind of feel like talking about cold and refreshing, probably prayer time. I've kind of grown in prayer time over the years. Definitely have lots of room for improvement, but just really being able to spend time with God and just being in His presence is becoming more and more refreshing. And I've shared it with some other folks that saying that as time goes on, I don't look at it as duty anymore. It started out as like, discipline. Now it's like whenever I'm not in God's presence, I feel like I'm missing something. Like somehow, there's something less in my life. And so that's been really kind of cool. Continue to kind of fight for it, because that's really where I'm also lukewarm. The passage comes out, remember, Jesus said the sower threw seeds all over, and there was like seeds that got thrown around in the thorn bushes, and they got choked out. I kind of feel like some of the lukewarm stuff is I get choked out. I'm worried about this, I'm worried about that. I'm worried about all of the different, divisions going back and forth, and I can get a little cynical, I can get a little weary, and then all of a sudden I just feel like those things just suck the life out of you. And that's where I kind of feel like, man, I can see myself getting a little lukewarm in certain areas of compassion and being engaged and all of that sort of stuff. You just got to get overwhelmed, and you're just like, whatever. Rather than, what, Jesus is enthroned. Jesus is my Lord. Like, if I get more Jesus, this is awesome.
Yeah, I think the lukewarmness can come in so many different forms when it comes from like the details of the day or the worries of the day. And you can get sort of cut by 1,000 paper cuts, and you can sort of become overtaken by those little details that can get so, can really mess us up in a lot of senses, and not getting to the big picture ideas of passion and refreshment and what Christ can really do in your life.
Totally. Such a good point. I wanted to kind of move on to the next question about being deceived. One of the things that strikes me like crazy about the church in Laodicea is their assessment of themselves and Jesus' assessment of themselves, right? Of them. They're saying, no, we're rich, we're wealthy, we need nothing. And then Jesus is, you're poor, wretched, blind, and pitiful. I wonder if, like, how much are we deceived? And I want to kind of sit there and talk about it, not just personally, but maybe Grand Prairie, right? Because when we look at the 7 churches of Laodicea, they were all wealthy, but Laodicea was like the rich of the rich, right? Like they have more than anything else. I kind of look at it and just wonder if it ain't that for Grand Prairie. Like all of Alberta's rich, but somehow I think Grand Prairie is even that much more. And are we a little deceived? Like, what would you say to that?
Peter's just, see ya. That's funny. He's back. Well, we answered your questions, Peter. What's the next one? No.
That's awesome. You guys are awesome.
We haven't answered it yet.
No, I was going to hit my mute button and I actually hit the stop button.
I'm kind of interested in what David says, because he's not recently, but he's been in another context in the last decade, and I haven't, and you haven't. Maybe seen other places, but he's actually lived somewhere else. I
was thinking.
Go ahead, David.
No, I was just thinking about Halloween and how when I was a kid, we used to my mom used to make my Halloween costumes, but how many families actually make their Halloween costumes? And because of that, we always go out and purchase them for our kids now. And when it comes to understanding how wealthy we are, I think a lot of times we forget um, a lot of the disposable elements that we face today, and we think that they're disposable when in fact they weren't. And that's sort of a marker of wealth, I guess, in the Grand Prairie community.
Mm. Mm.
Well, and I was also thinking like just how much how much danger riches can be to our spiritual life, right? Like scripture talks about it over and over again. Like, don't make me rich so that I forget you. Don't make me poor so that I steal. Or like when the young rich ruler leaves, Jesus sits there and says, like, it's harder for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven than, camel through the eye of a needle. And I think that's probably some of the things I would say to myself as well, right? When we think about riches, because riches can be very deceiving, right? When things are going well, we think that we equate that with God's blessing, and maybe that's the difficult part. What were you gonna add to that, Caleb?
Essentially what you said. I think you can be riches when it pervades a whole culture or a whole city. It can be hard to get away from. But it is also possible for those who are, it's possible to be in that city and have a mindset. It's also possible to be poor and be incredibly greedy or incredibly concerned about wealth, and you actually don't have a lot. Really, the heart, and I mean, Paul says, "No, I know how to abound with material goods. I also know how to go without." And so, it's comforting to know that we don't have to be sucked into whatever the prevailing culture, whatever our city setting is. We don't have to be. We can, through Christ, learn how to steer everything for His purposes and kind of bring everything toward Him. I wondered with Laodicea, this is just something I remembered about the sermon, where Christ says, you're neither hot nor cold, so I will spit you out of my mouth. I'm going to vomit you out. It's really very graphic terms, and I wonder if that's also kind of mirroring back to the Laodicean church their view of impoverished people or their view of others. I don't know for sure. I don't have any context for that, but it just struck me that so often Jesus kind of mirrors back. He's going to treat you the way you want to treat the least of these, right? And for him to. So maybe the Laodiceans, it wasn't just wealth, it was also that pride and that arrogance and like really looking down on those who would be poor or those who would be kind of outcast, perhaps. I don't know for sure, but that was a thought that came to my head.
Yeah, maybe they stop looking, and that's the problem. Looking for help, looking for anything from Jesus.
Yeah.
That's a totally cool thought, Caleb. Like I said, yeah, it definitely doesn't say that, but again, more of the dangers of wealth, because I think the more we kind of push into that quadrant, sometimes it kind of blinds us. Sometimes we're less compassionate because of that, and definitely, they definitely say right out of the gates, like, we're self-sufficient, we're good to go, right? And that often blinds us from the needs of others. Like, we're doing okay, why can't you be? That's a great thought. Lastly, just wanted to ask the question of, Jesus says, I stand at the door and I knock. Anyone who hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and dine with that person and they with me. Maybe I'll leave it fairly open. What does that mean to you in this season of life?
For myself, I think I find nourishment and from Jesus in that fact that if I seek Him, He'll come into my house and he'll fill me up with whatever I need, whatever energy I need for the day, whatever sort of situations come my way, I can overcome them, or I can figure them out at least with Jesus in my picture. And and that understanding that he goes with me into any situation.
Yeah, and I would say for me, it's just the thought that there's a desire on God's part just to be with me. That presence and that fellowship is really, really encouraging to know that. And how often do people feel lonely, or people feel like, well, no one's seeking me out. But Jesus is seeking you out. And he's always on that mission, and to think that he's seeking me out is great, and it actually encourages me. Then it's not about me. Then maybe together with Jesus we can seek other people.
And when you were saying that, Caleb, I thought about the other side, and maybe a little convicting side for me, that if my relationship with God isn't very good, it's usually on me, not on Jesus. Right?
Yeah.
That somehow I have not made time for Jesus. I have not opened the door, because Jesus says very clearly, I'm standing at the door, I'm knocking. I think this is like one of the most, I think it's one of the most powerful, for me, images of God's grace, because he's just said how broken the church in Laodicea is. And even in the midst of him talking about how broken it is, he's saying, I'm pursuing you. I'm pursuing a relationship. I want us to be good. I'm standing at the door. I'm knocking. Please open the door. Right? And that's to me is this beautiful picture of like what Jesus is doing. Like, that's crazy. Anyway, that's what I have for this week. Was there anything that was kind of burning on your hearts when you were walking through the church in Laodicea?
Just that some commentators and some people that I've read have said that it's almost less of a, it's a letter to a whole church, and so Jesus wants into the church.
Correct.
And if there's even one person, I've heard some others say, if there's even one person who will receive Christ, then Christ will be in that church. And it's a church where there's a lot of people who perhaps are false. They don't actually want the substance and the person of God. They want the idea of being spiritual, perhaps. And it's the idea that even, maybe it's a family context, or maybe it's a household context, or maybe it's another context. But when Jesus is wanting in, it just takes one person. Just as one person to say yes, and then Christ's there, and it might be small, but he's there, and he preserves. He preserves because of that person is there. It kind of has a salt and light effect, preserving the rest.
Probably from the church in Laodicea, I sort of get the idea that I need to seek Jesus's perspective more than the world's perspective, or the events going on in my life, and to just pursue him to understand where I need to go and where I need to grow.
That's a good word. That's an awesome word. Well, thank you. Thank you for joining us for Living in the Scriptures Live, and this is Life here in McLaurin. Blessings, y'all.
Right on.